NMBA, New Mexico Book Association, is pleased to match one superhero, George R.R. Martin, with another, Mary Charlotte Domandi, producer and host of KSFR's Radio Café.
Thank you all for joining us here tonight. It's great to see the old place full. Anyway, they've asked me to do a reading, so I have my new book here, Rogues, which just came out yesterday, as a matter of fact. So I'm going to read from that. We have copies here if any of you want it, and you'll see out in the room we have copies of a lot of books from our author events. We're, in addition to being a movie theater, we're like the world's most exclusive bookstore. The greatest of his rivals was our rogue prince, Daemon Targaryen, the king's ambitious, impetuous younger brother. As charming as he was hot-tempered, Prince Daemon had earned his knight spurs at 6 and 10, and had been given Dark Sister by the old king himself in recognition of his prowess. Though he had wed the Lady of Runestone in 97 AC during the old king's reign, the marriage had not been a success. Prince Daemon found the Vale of Arryn boring. In the Vale, men fuck sheep, he wrote. You cannot fault them. Their sheep are prettier than their women. He soon developed a mislike of his lady wife, whom he called my bronze bitch, after the runic bronze armor worn by the lords of House Royce. Upon the accession of his brother to the Iron Throne, the prince petitioned to have his marriage set aside. Viserys denied the request, but did allow Daemon to return to court, where he sat on the small council, serving as Master of Coin from 103 to 104, and Master of Laws for half a year in 104.
Well, and, I mean, I was thinking about something that I heard one of the Beatles say when asked about his first album, or about the Beatles' first album, and he said, look, we weren't trying to be superstars, we were trying to make a record. And I was wondering how, when you were young, you envisioned your future life as a writer.
Well, you know, you don't really envision it. You can only hope. You know, you can only hope. You take one thing at a time. I mean, when I was young, I was just trying to write stories for the comic book fanzines. Those were my first stories. Get them published, hoping that people liked them. It was a thrill for me when someone noticed my story and there were 2-3 letters saying what a good story he wrote. It took me 6 years. I wrote short stories for 6 years before I attempted that first novel. Those novels were very intimidating to me. Believe it or not, you know, I wrote short in the early days. It was very, God, this story is 10,000 words long. How it's impossibly long. Now, of course, I turn out 300,000 words when I'm supposed to be writing 50, so. What if I don't make it as a writer? What can I possibly do? Well, I am good with words, so I'll study journalism, and I'll be a reporter, and then I'll write these science fiction stories on the side.
Did your work as a journalist or your study of journalism inform the way you wrote fiction at all?
I don't know if it influenced the way I wrote fiction. It influenced my style, because you know, the journalism professors I had were very much of the old school of, you know, make it lean, make it tight. They would be horrified by what I'm writing these days. The really main thing that journalism did for me, journalism school anyway, was open me up to the world. I was a very, very shy kid. I didn't have a lot of friends. I was shy around other kids and all that. You know, I was a dreamy kid who read a lot and spent a lot of time in his room reading and writing, making up my own stories, playing games with myself, kind of thing. Journalism forced me out of that because, you know, I had to get out and report on people. I would get an assignment. I had to go interview some guy I'd never met. It threw me into all these situations and really broke down that kind of shyness and reticence that I had. So I became able to talk to people, and more than that, to listen to people, to hear their stories, and to hear everybody's different viewpoint and the different voices that people had. And I think all of that enriched my writing immeasurably.
Talk about the science fiction and fantasy market and its fan base. How does that compare to other forms of fiction?
It's been different. It's been different for a long time. You know, science fiction was a pulp genre. It became a genre in 1926 when a guy named Hugo Gernsback launched the first science fiction magazine, Amazing Stories. And it was a pulp magazine in an era when there were hundreds of pulp magazines. A pulp writer only got a penny a word, and sometimes for the lesser pulps, half a cent a word, a quarter cent a word. So you had to write very fast and down and dirty and all that. Then something very curious happened in the early 50s where television came in and the pulps died, except for science fiction. The science fiction pulps were the only ones that really survived. The other thing that happened was in the 30s, people wrote letters to the pulps about what stories they liked, what stories they did not like. And in those days, they printed your full address when they printed your letter, something they don't do these days. So the fans of science fiction began to write to each other. And then in the late 30s, they started meeting together for the first science fiction conventions. The first one was held in Philadelphia, I think, in like 1938 or so. And then the next year, 1939, they had the Worldcon, the grand, you know, because they were having the World's Fair in New York City. So the World Convention instead, and people came to that. And so this whole subculture of science fiction fandom grew up. And it sustained the pulps, I think, the science fiction pulps when the rest of them went. And these fans were very intent and very expert.